The first thing Rose Calloway said to Eagle Feather was, "I don't need you." The second thing she said 2 seconds later was, "But I'll pay you 40 cents a day in meals if you can mend a fence line and keep your opinions to yourself." He had looked at the fence in question, 300 yards of collapsed posts and rusted wire along the north pasture, and then looked at the woman standing in front of him with her arms crossed in the particular expression of someone who has been fighting every battle alone for so long that asking for help feels like surrender. 50 cents, he said. She stared at him. "The wire is older than the fence," he said. "It will need replacing, not mending. That is 2 jobs, not 1. A long pause. The Kansas wind moved through the dry grass between them. 45, she said, "and you sleep in the barn." "Agreed," said Eagle Feather, and that was how it began. What neither of them said, in that first conversation or the many that followed, was the thing that mattered most. They were both, in different ways, running out of time. Rose Calloway had owned the Calloway Ranch for 14 months, owned it alone since the morning her husband David had gone out to check the south water line and not come back, and they had found him 3 days later at the bottom of the ravine where his horse had thrown him. She had buried him in the hill behind the barn. She had cried for 3 weeks in private and then stopped, because there was no one to run the ranch if she didn't run it, and the banknote came due regardless of grief. 14 months of that. 14 months of learning, by failure and stubbornness in roughly equal measure, how to do the work of 2 people, the fences, the cattle, the accounts, the negotiations with buyers who looked at a woman alone and calculated how little they could offer. She was not losing, but she was not winning either. And the summer had been dry, drier than anyone in Barrow County could remember, and the grass was the color of old straw, and the creek was half what it should be, and there was a feeling in the air, the way there sometimes is before a bad thing happens, of the world holding its breath. Eagle Feather had arrived in Barrow County 3 weeks ago, looking for seasonal work after a job driving cattle north had ended in Wichita. He was Apache, Chiricahua specifically, which he mentioned to no one because it was the kind of information that caused problems before he'd had a chance to demonstrate that he was useful. He had a reputation among the ranchers who'd employed him before. Quiet, competent, the best tracker in 3 territories, and possessed of an inconvenient habit of pointing out structural problems that ranch owners would have preferred to ignore. The Calloway Ranch was full of structural problems, but it was also, he had noticed immediately, a ranch that someone had been fighting very hard to save. That counted for something. They did not like each other. That part is important to understand, because what came later only means anything if you understand how much friction came first. Rose found Eagle Feather presumptuous. He had opinions about everything. The fence line, yes, but also the rotation of the cattle on the south pasture, the depth of the new water trench she was digging, the way she'd been patching the barn roof, which he informed her, with infuriating calm, would not survive a serious storm. "I didn't ask for your assessment of my roof," she told him on the 4th day. "No," he agreed, driving a post with the methodical rhythm of someone who has done this 10,000 times. "But the roof does not care whether you asked." She had walked away before she said something she'd regret. She was fairly sure he'd watched her go with that same infuriating equanimity. Eagle Feather, for his part, found Rose Calloway exhausting in the specific way that people are exhausting when they are determined to make everything harder than it needs to be out of sheer refusal to accept help. She checked his work. Every morning, not surreptitiously, openly, walking the fence line he'd mended the previous day, running her hand along the wire. The first week he found this irritating. The second week he found it, reluctantly, something else. She wasn't checking because she thought he'd done it wrong. She was checking because she needed to understand how he'd done it right. She was learning. He adjusted his opinion of her by a small but significant margin. The mystery began on a Wednesday, 3 weeks into his employment, when Rose came back from town with the kind of silence that meant something had happened. He was at the water trough when she rode in. He did not ask. He had learned that she told him things on her own timeline, or not at all, and asking accelerated nothing. She unsaddled her horse. She stood with her hands on the stall door for a long moment. Harlan Briggs offered to buy the ranch again, she said finally. Harlan Briggs was the largest landowner in Barrow County. Eagle Feather had heard his name 3 times since arriving, always in the context of land that used to belong to someone else. What did you tell him? What I always tell him. She turned around. Her face was the controlled face of someone managing something large. No. He'll ask again. I know. A pause. He said something this time. He said I should take the offer while it was still a good one, that the summer wasn't going to get easier. She looked at Eagle Feather directly. It sounded like he knew something. Eagle Feather said nothing for a moment. He was thinking about the dry grass, the low creek, the way the wind had been coming from the southwest for 2 weeks, hot and constant, the kind of wind that in his experience preceded one of 2 things, a drought breaking or something worse. Where does Briggs's land sit relative to yours? He asked. North and east, she frowned. Why? Your grass is dry. Everyone's grass is dry. No, he said carefully. Your grass is drier than the Mercer spread 2 miles south. I rode past it yesterday. Same rainfall, same soil. Yours is worse. He paused. Something is blocking your water before it reaches you. Rose stared at him. That's not possible, she said. The creek comes from the north, he said, through Briggs's land. The silence that followed was the kind that changes things. You already know something is wrong on that ranch. Subscribe now, and hit the bell so you don't miss what Eagle Feather finds when he rides north. He rode north the next morning before Rose was awake. He told himself it was reconnaissance, information gathering, nothing more. The same practical habit that had kept him alive through 20 years of working the edges of other people's conflicts. He told himself it had nothing to do with the way Rose had looked standing in the barn, managing something large and refusing to show it. He was not entirely convincing, even to himself. What he found 2 miles north, where Briggs's fence line met the creek bend, was a recently constructed earthen dam, crude but effective, diverting roughly 1/3 of the creek flow into a new channel that ran east toward Briggs's expanded cattle operation. It had been built within the last 2 months. It was, without question, illegal under territorial water law. It was also, Eagle Feather realized as he studied the dry creek bed downstream, the reason Rose Calloway's ranch was slowly dying. He rode back and told her. All of it. Directly, without softening. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat down on the porch step, not collapsing, just sitting, the way you sit when you need a moment to reorganize everything you thought you knew. Her hands were on her knees. The morning sun was harsh and flat on the dry grass. He knew the summer wasn't going to get easier, she said quietly, because he was making sure of it. Yes. How long before my cattle start dying? 4 weeks, maybe 6 if the rains come. She looked out at the pasture, at the cattle moving slowly in the heat, at the fence line Eagle Feather had mended, running clean and straight along the north pasture, the fence she'd checked every morning, running her hand along the wire, learning. I'm going to the sheriff, she said. Yes, Eagle Feather said, and while you do that, I'm going to document the dam. Measurements, position, construction date estimate, you will need evidence. She looked at him. That's on Briggs's land. I am aware. He has men. I am also aware of that. A long pause. The wind moved through the dry grass. Eagle Feather, she said. Why are you still here? I mean, you could have taken your wages and left a week ago. You don't owe me anything. He considered the question. He had been considering it, in fact, for several days, with the same methodical attention he gave to fence posts and water flow and structural problems that ranch owners preferred to ignore. The ranch is good land, he said finally. It deserves to survive. She watched him for a moment. That's not the whole answer, she said. He met her eyes. No, he said. It's not. He left before she could ask the rest of the question. What happened next is the part that Rose Calloway would tell differently depending on who asked her. Eagle Feather documented the dam. He also found, while doing so, 3 of Briggs's men pulling a second diversion further upstream, a discovery that became urgent when one of them saw him. He made it back to the ranch at a dead run, arriving 20 minutes ahead of the men Briggs sent after him, which was enough time to tell Rose what was coming, but not enough time to do much about it. "Barn," Rose said immediately. "Rifles." "Rose, don't tell me to hide." She was already moving. "I know how to shoot. Can you ride faster than 3 men?" "Yes." "Then you ride for the sheriff. I hold the house." She stopped and looked at him. Her hair was down, it had been coming loose all day in the wind, and her blouse was damp with the heat, and she looked, Eaglefeather thought, like a woman who had been fighting for 14 months and had no intention of stopping now. "The evidence is in the top left drawer of the desk, sealed envelope. You make sure that gets to the sheriff even if nothing else does. Understand?" "I understand," he said. "But I'm not leaving you here alone." "Eaglefeather. I will send the evidence with the Mercer boy. He is fast and Briggs's men won't follow a child. I stay." He looked at her steadily. "This is not negotiable." A beat. 2. "Fine," she said. "Then let's make this defensible." They held the ranch house for 4 hours. It was not a battle. Briggs's men were intimidators, not fighters, and what they hadn't counted on was a woman who shot straight and an Apache tracker who knew exactly which positions covered every approach to the building. By the time the sheriff arrived with 2 deputies, Briggs's men had been at a standoff for 3 hours and were considerably less confident than when they'd arrived. The sealed envelope made it to the sheriff's office intact. Briggs was arrested the following morning. The evening after the sheriff left, Rose and Eaglefeather sat on the porch steps in the cooling dark. The wildfire smell had gone. It had come from the east, a distant brush fire that the wind had been carrying for days, and it had turned north before it became a real danger. The sky was clear. The first stars were out. They had not spoken much since the sheriff's departure. There was a specific kind of exhaustion that follows sustained fear, not the tired of hard work, which Rose knew well, but the tired of having held yourself at a high pitch for too long. "You didn't have to stay," Rose said. It was not an accusation. It was something she was still working out. "No," Eaglefeather agreed. "You could have taken the horse and been in the next territory by now." "Yes." A pause. "An owl somewhere in the north pasture." "David, my husband, he used to say that a ranch is just land until someone decides it's worth fighting for." She was looking out at the dark pasture. "I never quite understood what he meant until I was doing it alone." Eaglefeather said nothing. He had learned that she sometimes needed to say things aloud that she'd been keeping inside, and that the kindest thing was to be present without filling the space. "I think I've been fighting so hard to keep what was his," she said quietly, "that I forgot to figure out what I actually want." A pause. "What I want is the ranch. Not because David loved it, because I love it. I think I've known that for a while, and I didn't want to admit it because it felt like I was replacing him somehow." "The land was his," Eaglefeather said. "What you built on it is yours." She turned and looked at him. In 14 months of fighting and 14 months of grief and the long, slow work of becoming someone she hadn't known she could be, Rose Calloway had become very good at reading what people meant beneath what they said. She was reading him now. "Eaglefeather," she said, "what is it that you actually want?" The question sat between them in the dark. He had been moving for 20 years, territory to territory, job to job, the particular freedom of a man with no fixed address and the particular loneliness that is freedom's shadow. He had told himself it was practical. He had told himself it was enough. "I want," he said slowly, "to stop moving." The stars were very bright over the Kansas prairie. Rose Calloway looked at the man sitting beside her, the man who had stayed when he didn't have to, who had pointed out every structural problem on her ranch with infuriating accuracy, who had ridden north at dawn to find the answer to a question she hadn't known to ask. And she made a decision the way she made most decisions now, clearly, without flinching, on her own terms. "The north pasture fence will need work again come spring," she said. A pause. "It will," Eaglefeather agreed. 50 cents a day," she said. "And the barn is cold in winter. There's a room in the house." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but the place where a smile comes from. "Agreed," he said. It was the same word as the beginning. It meant something entirely different now. "If this story stayed with you," Leave a like and subscribe. New frontier stories every single week on Wild West Romance Stories. Comment below. When did you realize Eagle Feather wasn't going to leave? Epilogue. 2 years later. The Calloway Ranch was the best watered spread in Barrow County by the spring of 1873, after a territorial judge ordered Briggs's Dam demolished and the creek restored. The cattle operation had doubled. The barn roof had been replaced, properly this time, before the first winter snow. People in Barrow County had opinions, naturally, about Rose Calloway and the Apache man who had stopped moving. People in small towns always have opinions. Rose had developed, over 26 months of fighting for her land, a comprehensive indifference to other people's opinions. Eagle Feather had always been indifferent to them. It was one of the first things they'd had in common. What they had now was more than that. A fence line that ran clean and true for 300 yards along the north pasture. Cattle that knew them both. A porch where they sat in the evenings and sometimes talked and sometimes didn't, because they had reached the particular comfort of two people who no longer needed to fill silence to prove something. And on Sunday mornings, when the light came long and gold across the Kansas prairie and the creek ran clear and full where it was always supposed to run, Rose Calloway would stand at the kitchen window and watch Eagle Feather checking the water level with the same methodical attention he gave to everything. And she would think about David. She still thought about David. She supposed she always would. And she would also think, this is mine. All of it. The grief and the land and the man checking the water and the life I built from what was left. She had stopped running from that thought. She let it stay.